5:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, I want to thank you for joining CADRE's webinar on Part C Dispute Resolution Customizable Hearing Officer Training Resources. Today's webinar is one in a continuing series of CADRE webinars. You'll notice that our presenter today is CADRE's very own policy analyst, Amy Whitehorn. Amy Whitehorn has her doctorate in jurisprudence and joined CADRE in October 2011, coming from Vermont, where she practiced education law and was involved in numerous aspects of the compliance and dispute resolution provisions of IDEA. Amy provides policy analysis and technical assistance on the procedural safeguards and dispute resolution provisions of IDEA for CADRE, including preparing the annual SPP APR analyses for the dispute resolution indicators and leading CADRE's efforts in early intervention. Having worked with a broad array of individuals and organizations on education issues ranging from elementary to post-secondary, special education, and workforce training, in addition to being herself an individual with a disability, Amy brings a wealth of knowledge and experiences that support the technical assistance CADRE provides to state education agencies, lead agencies, and parent technical assistance centers. So it's a real pleasure then to turn the webinar over to Amy.
Thanks, Marshall. Thank you, everyone who's with us today. Really excited to share these resources with you. As Marshall mentioned, we invite you to put questions or comments in the chat box as we go through. And if something comes to light in the process of going through the presentation that makes sense to address it during the presentation, we'll pause and do that. Otherwise, I think what we'll do is the notion here is we're showing you tools that have been developed for states to actually use, and I think it might make sense to go through the tools and then address questions maybe more toward the end. But please, if you have any burning questions, pop them in there. I'm going to share my desktop here, and this presentation I'm going to be going back and forth between essentially two PowerPoint presentations. The first is going to be our presentation today, and then I'm actually going to pop into one of the 4 modules that we've developed, so you'll get to see live and in person what one of the 4 tools we've developed looks like. So with that, here we go. So what we have here are 4 modules that are that came out of a development process that began with a needs assessment that CADRE did a couple of years ago with great support from the Infant Toddler Coordinators Association. And from that needs assessment, there were certain dispute resolution needs that were identified, and 6 states who stepped forward and really wanted to be a part of working together on these things. So you'll see the 6 lead agencies that participated there: Connecticut, Colorado, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Texas, and Utah. In addition, we were fortunate enough to have our friends from the ECTA Center, the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, formerly NECTAC, as well as participation from folks at the Western Regional Resource Center join in the work group, and also support from ITGA and from Sharon Walsh, who worked with us on this work group and on this project as well. So much appreciation to all those who were involved in the development process. What came from the process, from the work group, are a set of 4 training modules that are intended to be tools for states to build upon, to use to train hearing officers and administrative law judges, ALJs, that really should have cross-applicability with regard to bringing mediators or complaints investigators or new staff members, or, you could probably think of other folks that once you see these modules and what the information that is contained within, you may think of other folks that you can use these tools with to help them understand some of the important pieces of Part C, procedural safeguards, and specifically dispute resolution. And finally, out of our lead agency work group, Connecticut was the first to actually pilot these modules. And in the course of showing you the module that is developed as a template for states to build upon, I'll show you a couple of slides that Connecticut actually, where they took the cues that are planted throughout the modules, the templates, and they built upon to kind of show you what it looked like from a finished perspective on their end. We won't be going through their entire presentation, but again, just a couple of slides. So the training modules are intended, as I said, to be customizable for each state to really take what we've provided, which is a foundation of the federal dispute resolution provisions from the procedural safeguards from Part C of the IDEA, and build upon that with state regulations, policies, and procedures that relate to each of the parts of the procedural safeguards and the dispute resolution regulations under Part C. So as we go through the module, the sample module that I'll show you today, you'll note that there are placeholder slides included throughout these modules, sort of as a cue to lead agencies where you could drop in specific things. Although I want to emphasize right from the very get-go that these are really designed as tools for states, for lead agencies, to really take and use and mold and build as really works for you. So by no means are these considered fixed products that, people may like to actually use them as they are, but they're really intended for you to build upon them and make them your own. So again, I sort of touched on this a little bit before. The real intention from the work group's perspective was to develop these tools to help Part B hearing officers in particular. Part C has really, you all probably know this, very little dispute resolution activity, and for probably lots of reasons. We won't talk about those today, but there's very little activity in the dispute resolution realm in Part C. And so even though there isn't a lot of activity, lead agencies, states are still required to have hearing officers, mediators, complaint investigators at the ready to respond when a due process complaint or hearing request or a written state complaint or mediation request comes in. And so in particular, the work group identified hearing officers potentially from Part B as a resource to tap into to make sure that they are at the ready when a due process complaint comes rolling in the door. So thinking that Part B hearing officers sort of have already got some experience with hearings, most likely, and understand probably Part B of IDEA, hopefully, and that here we have built on their knowledge of Part B and really highlighted the Part C requirements, the processes and procedures, and noted the key differences between the two parts of IDEA. One of the four modules, and I'll outline the four modules in just a moment, but one of the four modules, as an example, is the EI, early intervention, I'm tripping over my own tongue, early intervention process, which is different from Part B process, especially with regard to child find and identification. And so just as an example, there will be a significant difference for a hearing officer to be aware of if identification is in a complaint. So we've actually put signals in that help a hearing officer link both to the Part B regulation and then have available to them the Part C information. So it's really meant to be a hands-on, quick, handy resource as well as training resources generally. In addition, there's, again, the real importance that states, especially lead agencies, Part C is so different from Part B. There are some real differences state to state on how things go, what things look like, whether due process complaints are on the same track as Part B in the state versus whether Part C has its own dispute resolution track, due process track. So it's really important that states, make their hearing officers aware of the differences in your state, your lead agency, and really generally, as I said, to help folks locate resources quickly. Hearing officers are very grateful when they don't have to spend a lot of time searching for information, especially considering, golly, Part C has a much shorter due process track generally than Part B. So sort of there. The 4 modules that we developed sort of took the dispute resolution and actually let me back up a second. We sort of looked at the regulations and looked at birth to 3 and then 3 to 21 generally, and tried to give hearing officers a real overview look at the 2, and specifically with regard to C here. Thinking again that this was developed specifically with the B or an experienced Part B hearing officer or ALJ who's needing to learn about Part C. So it's really taking a look at Part C, not just at the dispute resolution pieces, but as Part C as a whole. So we broke the training modules into 4 different templates, 4 modules. The first overview, and it's really a sort of a 50,000-foot perspective of Part C. It gives a quick overview on the law, the lead agencies, how they're selected, which is different from Part B, et cetera. And then the second module is, as I mentioned earlier, the early intervention steps. And that module, which we'll be looking at Module C specifically today, but Module B follows the same early intervention steps that were developed by NICHE and OSEP as part of the training materials that are available through NICHE. And Part C focuses on procedural safeguards. And then another significant difference between C and B, the administrative areas, the insurance stuff, the money stuff that is a part of Part C that does not exist, well, not to the same degree in Part B. So what we'll be looking at today is Module C. This is a slide that's actually taken from Module A that shows an overview of what Module C is. And we'll look at the general responsibility of each lead agency, confidentiality in records, parental consent, prior written notice, surrogate parents, and the dispute resolution options. So now I'm going to switch screens here for a second and pop into our Module C. So the way that each of these modules is set up is really information on a blank canvas for you. There's really no formatting. It's white backgrounds. There's no branding. And at the beginning of each of the 4 modules, you'll have this slide and the next slide, as which you may decide to keep, or you could completely take out. But the first is the overview of how the module came to be, which is what I was sharing with you all earlier. And then the acknowledgments of the individuals who helped to build these tools. And so while we would love to have this included in your presentation, it's up to you where you want to put it. But each of the modules has a similar format. This is the really introductory first slide for each module, and you'll see how it's set up. It's consistent. And then at the bottom, Module C there in brackets. So I'm going to go through pretty quickly, so hopefully nobody gets motion sick through this. I won't zoom too quickly. And then as we are going through, if you think of questions, whether they relate to formatting or content or use or just anything that you can think of, please put those questions in the chat box and we will go through them. We'll be sure to allow a bit of time here at the end to do Q&A. And I didn't say this at the beginning, so I want to be sure to get this in here now, and we'll reiterate it at the end. But Cadre is really invested in helping lead agencies make these tools your own and make them as usable as possible. And so any one of you who are interested, and again, this is really designed for lead agencies to be using as a tool to build, it definitely has potential for others. So I don't want to recognizing that this is really designed as a tool for state lead agencies. So for lead agencies who are interested and would like support or help or would like to talk more about using these, certainly invite you to please get in touch with us here at Cadre, with me, and we will figure it out for you, or with you, rather. So at the beginning of each of the modules, we have a purpose and disclaimer slide. Certainly, none of us, technical assistants, folks, are in a position to provide interpretation of the law, and I imagine many of you out there are in a similar position. That's the job of hearing officers, right? So we have a purpose and disclaimer slide at the beginning of each module. It's identical. And it is encouraged that states take this through your own counsel, modify this to your own boilerplate or whatnot, add to it as needed. But it's there for you for protection, if nothing else. With the federal statutes, and I want to point out, you may have noticed this in a couple of the earlier slides, but anywhere you see the blue, these things are hyperlinked. Any citations or potentially sections of, in this case, the law, the IDEA, anywhere you see the blue with an underline is a hyperlink that will take you immediately to another resource. Now, I won't do that right now. We may jump to one later just to show you how it works, one that's a quickie. But this is one of the this was one of the biggest pieces of putting this tool together, was linking it directly to the law, to the regs. Again, with the thinking that a hearing officer who maybe has looked at this once or twice before as a training resource and then is suddenly in a due process case and during the hearing needs access to things quickly. This is really designed to be a resource for them to be able to jump to stuff quickly. And we have chosen resources around the law. We have chosen neutral resources. So you're either going to go to the government, excuse me, to the government sites where these legal resources are located. Actually, they pretty much all go to the government site. So this is not linking, for example, to Westlaw or Lexis or something like that. This is actually linking to the U.S. education and I'm losing my vocabulary. But anyway, to the Federal Register in some cases, or et cetera. So these are federal resources. So this is the same list that we saw a little bit earlier. This is the breakdown of the 6 different sections of this module. Similar to hyperlinking the regulations or the law, these actually can take you right to the section of the presentation. So thinking, for example, a hearing officer who may be just looking at prior written notice and who has used this resource before, they can simply, all the way through, just click right to prior written notice and get to that section. Does everybody see that? I'll do that again. So they actually have the option to just click right there, and it'll take them to that section of the presentation, which we'll get to in a minute. And you can see we've jumped, a number of about 20 slides. So. And that's true for each of these. And this is also set up, in each of the modules is set up this way so that someone can jump to the different sections of the tools. So again, I'm going to start to cruise through a little bit. Starting with general responsibility, here we have the cite to the regulations, or regulation in this case. And then the regulation is verbatim here. There has been no interpretation, no modifications to the language. This is straight talk coming right from the register, from the code. So links here to different sections, and as I mentioned before, comparisons and links to Part B, where a hearing officer can quickly jump to take a look at, what are the general responsibilities in this instance of the SEA, and they can jump to these sections here. We've got confidentiality and the opportunity to examine records. And for sections that are longer, like this one, we have taken the subsections and broken them into individual slides. As you can imagine, some of these regulations are rather lengthy, and so wanting to be very precise and keep with the literal language of the regs, we've decided this is the better way to lay this out. So we've got subsections here instead of, just as an example, the last one, we had the subsections all on this slide. So there's B. And you'll note that this section references FERPA. And so here we've given links to FERPA as well. We've got more of B, C, D. And then, because this section, again, goes pretty long, we've provided a hearing officer with a touchstone at the beginning with the various sections and subsections of 401, and then for 402 through 409, and then 410 through 417. We've given, rather than, I don't know, we'd probably be looking at about 1,000 slides at that point. No, I'm just kidding. Instead of killing their eyes with here, we've given links, because it may not be that they need access to all this information, and instead they can jump right to the regs. And then comparisons to where to find related information or comparable information in Part B. So this is the first slide that we're looking at that is one of those cues to an LA, a lead agency, that, okay, now it's your turn. So we've given you the federal basics, and you can see how we've laid it out. Now's the time that you will want to be filling in the blanks for how it works in your world. And we've given some tips. So every one of the state cue slides will look like this. It has this little state-specific cue on it, and you won't see hyperlinks on these. So these are going to be basically black and white slides, which is kind of a nice cue that, oh, this is us, And there's a recommendation, recommendations on the type of information that you might want to include. And then at the bottom, reminding you that, it's probably worth you putting a link in there to the comparable rules or regulations in your state, or you may even have some statutes on certain parts, especially around confidentiality and statutes. But to consider linking comparable pieces of your Part B system here so that your Part B hearing officer is like, oh yeah, I recognize that. That makes sense. Now I'm going to switch back for a second to our other show, and I'll show you what Connecticut did with that particular slide. So the one that we were just looking at. Connecticut, rather than laying out bullets and a bunch of URL links to things, they actually decided to pep up their presentation a little bit with some pictures. And what you see here are actually hot linked, hyperlinked photos of their family handbook and parent rights brochures. They make all of these materials, as many of you do out there, they make all of these materials available on their website. And as you can see, as I've got the little finger mousing over here, this takes you to a direct link. And if you were to click on one of these, which I'm not going to do, again, some of these take a few seconds to open up because they're large files. But if you're a hearing officer and somebody mentions one of these in the case, or you need to get to this information fast, this is a way that you can get to it quickly. And then this is their main site that has all of this information on it. But so this is how Connecticut. And then I want to point out over here, I mentioned earlier that the slides that we've developed, the modules, the templates, they're not branded in any way. And we encourage you to brand these with your lead agency's insignia or whatever. So this is the Connecticut Birth to 3 insignia down here at the bottom. And they also added that to the title page a little bit larger on that first slide, for example. So we will let's switch gears here again, go back to our other presentation. So actually, I'll take a second, since you all will be working with these as tools. Let me just show you. I imagine that a lot of people are probably familiar with PowerPoint, but maybe not everybody. But the number of slides in the presentation here in the tool that we've developed, each of the modules varies. Module B, the EI step module, is certainly the longest with those 8 steps that Nichi and OSEP developed as part of the EI process. From entrance to transition to Part B or to out of Part C. But it's important to note that you're starting with 41, and as I mentioned earlier, it's really up to you how much of this you want in or out. These are developed for you. So if you all decide, for example, that you would rather not have, 5 or 6 slides for one, but you'd rather have them set up like this, take advantage of that. Or if you feel like you'd rather flesh them out and not have more of the, menu option, then we encourage you to do that. But these are developed as a model, and, it's really a tool for you. I feel like a broken record, but it's that's the name of this game. So let me go forward. So this is what we were looking at. So Connecticut took this and put those 3 nice photographs of their brochures and then hyperlinked their brochures directly to their website. They then at the bottom put in a link to their site. So this, we moved through confidentiality. We've got notice. Again, a state slide on how notice works. Although here we do, I think I said earlier, I may have misspoken, that the state-specific slides are generally all black and white, but here we do have a link. Parental consent and a link to the B comparison. Again, a cue for state specifics. Getting into prior written notice, pardon me, which has some nuanced differences from B. And let me see, I believe, oh, we're not quite there yet, so we'll go down a few more. So the prior written notice state specific, I believe I've got an example from Connecticut on that as well that I'll share with you. Let's see. Yes, okay. So Connecticut, for their state specific prior written notice slide, actually inserted a link to the form that's used in their EI system, and excuse me, by EI providers. And then also, in the case that someone isn't able to open, provided the link so you can get directly to that information on the web. And again, with the branding in the corner here. So, native language, surrogate parenting. So if you can imagine, we've done this for each of the 4 modules, broken out the different sections. Here, again, we're talking about hearing officers. It's probably a really good idea to provide some extra special information on your dispute resolution system, because they're going to want to know, what's going on with that. You want to make sure that your hearing officers, they probably, hopefully, are already aware by the time they get there, but what the track is in your state for due process, or how people are able to get access to mediation, make requests for mediation. So we've provided the information here. Mediation and state complaints are pretty similar under Part C to Part B. But certainly when it comes to due process, Part C has that option. Lead agencies have the option to either adopt Part C hearing procedures or Part B hearing procedures. And so, golly, if you're in a state where your lead agency has adopted Part B hearing procedures, your Part B hearing officers are certainly, this is going to be a great tool for them, because they're already going to be hearing Part B. And for you states that are out there, I think there's 10 or 12 states that have adopted a Part B hearing procedures. Our hope is that you'll be able to adopt this tool to really help them with understanding Part C, these 4 modules. And again, for the others, Part C hearing procedures, there's a lot of states out there, as we said earlier, who really rely on Part B hearing officers to be ready and available for Part C, even though the birth to 3 system may be housed in under a different agency from their education agency. So things that are matters for complaints under the law. Again, it's verbatim. There's no adding extra stuff here with regard to the regulations and the law. We've really wanted it to be as true as a tool as possible. Let me go back one. Let's see. Yeah, so this would be, I would imagine that for states, especially states that have chosen a Part C hearing procedure system different from Part B, you probably are going to want to put in a lot of information here about how it works, so that if you're working with a Part B hearing officer, that they're aware that the timelines are shorter than they would be under Part B for things like, the 30-day timeline potentially, or whatnot. The other thing, the big difference, that there's no resolution meeting requirement under Part C. That's a big difference between C and B if a lead agency adopts Part C hearing procedures. So this is probably going to be more than just one slide for you. And this information is really the kind of stuff that we would hope that you would be able to use in training before they actually get a case. So again, thinking dual purpose or multi-purpose for these tools, some of these things are going to be in advance of, getting people prepared to be ready to take a case, in addition to being sort of a bookshelf resource or at-hand resource when they are in in the case. Each of the modules has a little, we're here to help you slide at the end, and then has a link to OSEP resources, which hearing officers will want to know about, and other TA resources that could be potentially helpful to them as they're, again, either training or in a case situation. So links to Early Childhood TA, to NICHE, to the Infant Toddler Coordinators Association, and the Division for Early Childhood in the CEC. So the lots of good resources there, as well as Cadre, we're on there too. So let's see, what have I got? I think we're pretty much, I talked really fast. Hopefully people were able to keep up with me. But this is basically this is it as far as looking at Module C. Now, if you can envision, again, there's 4 of these, and we pretty quickly just now 30 slides in Module C, with lots of opportunities for you to make additions or substitutions or ins or outs or whatever. And the 4 modules cover different areas. So that Module C was for procedural safeguards. Again, Module A is your sort of 50,000-foot perspective overview of Part C. B, that's a lengthy module. I think I recall there being about 60 or 70 slides that really lay out the key pieces in the federal regulations of the EI steps, from child find and child find identification all the way through to transition. And then that Module D, very different from Part B. So lots of administrative information, regulations, and places for you to put in your system of payment. System of payments and your fees, schedules, and insurance information, how that works in your state. Lead agencies vary widely on those things. So I'm going to zip it for a second and open it up for you all. Please bring on the questions.
Good. Yes. So we haven't seen any questions yet in the chat box. And before I say anything more, I mean, you can imagine that this represented an enormous amount of work for Amy and her colleagues on the team that developed it. So while it's a little bit sort of self-congratulatory since it's a cadre effort, I just really, when Amy goes through this stuff, I'm continually sort of knocked out by what a big and potentially important piece of work it is. So,
Thanks, Marshall.
So if you would like to ask a question over the phone, if you press #6, you should be unmuted, and then after you ask your question, if you'll press *6, you will be remuted, and it will keep noise off the line. So please, if you have a question, press #6 and go ahead.
I floored them. I could sing for you all, but that would be torture. Oh, do we have someone on with us?
So we have a question being entered into the chat box from Darla Griffin. Again, if you have a question you'd like to ask it over the line, if you'll just press #6, you'll be live.
So I'll take this opportunity to just sort of reiterate that while this is designed as a tool for lead agencies to really build and use, or build upon and use, it probably does have a broad application for others. And so we would love to hear if anyone's interested in this product or these tools. We would love to know maybe some other ways that you think that these might be useful and helpful to you. So in the work that you do, if you're outside the lead agency structure.
Yeah, also, in addition to this opportunity, if you have questions, You have Amy's contact information. She would be delighted to respond over the phone or an email to your questions. And Cadre is extremely committed to supporting Part C lead agencies as they work around their procedural safeguards. So if your lead agency has a particular need in this area, please contact Amy, and it's possible that we can provide you with some substantial assistance in terms of helping you to adopt this work. We did get a nice plug from Darla. Thanks, Darla. You're always such a treat to work with. And I see that Lanita Hartman from Colorado is typing a message.
And a shout out to Lanita as she's typing. Lanita was one of the members of our work group, and again, I'm really grateful to the work group that we had. Really, some awesome folks working together on this product, on these products, these tools.
Is it easy to get back to the credits slide?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So accessing the modules. So it is our intention that we will be making the modules available. But given their nature, we really hope that you'll get in touch with us to let us know how it is that we can be of help to you to help use these best in your world. But they will be made available pretty soon on our website.
Credits page.
Oh, I'll jump back to the credits page. So
yeah. A lot of people were involved in working on this, and as Amy mentioned, Lanita and the Dispute Resolution Work Group. We also got a lot of help from Sharon Walsh, from Western Regional Resource Center, from the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, from folks at OSEP, and then you'll see the list of leaders in the area of Part C who Amy worked with to pull this off. So very much, it takes a village might be a little bit overworked, but we did have a village kind of apply themselves to getting this done. Any questions before I tell you about our next webinar? So what we're going to do, please don't leave. We're going to put up some polls that, and would really appreciate you just taking a minute and letting us know about your experience with this webinar, the extent to which it was relevant, useful, and of high quality. While you're doing that, let me tell you that Cadre's next webinar will be on October the 2nd at 11:30 Pacific time. We're very excited that Dr. Tracy Muller will be joining us. Her topic is moving research to practice, lessons learned regarding meaningful homeschool collaboration. I have to tell you, Tracy has been a frequent collaborator with Cadre. She's the associate professor at the University of Northern Colorado, where she specializes in interventions for children and youth with challenging behaviors, family-school partnerships, and appropriate dispute resolution. She's published widely in this area, and we are very confident that she'll be delivering a tremendous webinar. So again, that is on November the 2nd from 11:30 to 12:45, and I think that pretty much gets us to the end here. So Amy, thank you again. It was a very informative session. Your work in this has been great, and for those of you who are on the call who helped put this resource together, thank you all very much, and take care. We very much appreciate your interest.
yes, thank you, everyone.